Our guest host, Ben Busch, is someone I've known, it seems like forever. He's too talented. I actually had to write down on a card all the things he can do competently. Ben is an actor. He is a photographer. He is a writer. He is a filmmaker. He is a published poet. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. And he is also the author of a memoir, Dust to Dust. He's been on NPR, Fox, Morning Joe. He had a recent article in Harper's Magazine. Ben left his farm in Reed City, Michigan, 70 miles south of here, flew to Baghdad, got in a taxi, and went to the Iranian border in the back seat of that taxi with his translator to go back to the village where he had fought as a Marine. And he wrote about that in Harper's Magazine in their October issue. It's an astounding achievement done by Ben quietly, as he does everything. As I say, he does all those things completely competently. And he is a good friend. I feel I could ask Ben to show up on the street corner a year from now holding a tennis racket and wearing a pink hat at 11:14 a.m. and he would be there. And I would never have to say another word about it. And those are the kinds of friends I like, and those are the kinds of friends that I think make us or make me a better person as well. So I'm very glad that he's on stage to talk to our two other esteemed guests. The first being Brian Castner, whose book, The Long Walk, is not about running out of gas on a family vacation, as he joked earlier, but it is about being a bomb tech in Iraq. That is the guy who diffuses the bombs. Ben has appeared in The Daily Beast. He's been on NPR, the New York Times, LA Review of Books. And believe it or not, this book is going to be an opera at the Saratoga Opera in 2015. He's highly acclaimed for his artistic ability, his storytelling. He's just finished a second book, which perhaps he'll talk about here on stage tonight. And he's with compadre Brian Turner, the two Bryans. While Brian Castner has an opera being made about The Long Walk, Brian Turner actually played in a hair band, bass. He served in the Army from 1998 to 2000, if I have those dates right. He's the author of 3 books: Here Bullet, a book of poetry; Phantom Noise, another book of poetry; and most recently, My Life as a Foreign Country, which is a memoir. This tonight is probably one of our most literary events, and it has to do with one of our most epic and transformative experiences, which is our actions overseas. However, these authors promise to surprise us, to talk about other things than combat. It's really talking about, as William Faulkner said, the human heart in conflict with itself, or that is that moment, that existential moment when you must make the right decision at the least opportune moment, which seems to me the stuff of great literature. Brian Turner's poems have been translated into Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, Italian, Polish. He writes for the National Geographic. He's been on the BBC. He's the recipient of an NEA Fellowship, a Lannan Foundation Fellowship. Phantom Noise was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award in England. He was part of the documentary Homecoming, which was nominated for an Academy Award. And he lives in Orlando, Florida, and leads the Sierra Nevada College of Creative Writing, the MFA program there. Please welcome, and we'll see you next season, Benjamin Busch, Brian Turner, and Brian Castner to this stage. Thank you.
Brezhnev took Afghanistan, and Begin took Beirut.
Thank you all for coming. What a lovely literate crowd we have tonight. I think people write better with beards. I think it's been proven by history, and I actually feel badly for writers who never grew a beard and reached their full potential. Keeps the words warm. But it is my great pleasure to bring these two august authors to the stage in all their glory. Brian Castner and Brian Turner, both good friends and fantastic writers, and we're going to talk a little bit about a little bit of everything tonight. As you can tell, we're setting things off on the right note. It's very cold out, and
but not under these beards.
no,
right.
No, we're very warm.
It's very, very warm, actually.
You knew you were going to get some Michigananigans tonight, so we wanted to welcome these guys. Brian Turner's coming all the way from Orlando, Florida. So this is actually kind of a foreign country to him. So his book, My Life is a Foreign Country, I wanted to prepare him for what we do here, which is grow beards. And Brian Turner, Brian Castner, it's going to be like this all night. Brian 1 and Brian 2. Brian Castner, his flight was canceled from Buffalo, where he lives. They got 90 inches of snow. And this is 5 miles south of his house. It's 5 miles, right?
Right.
And so we were exchanging. He was stressed out about not being here tonight because his flight was canceled, everything was canceled. He said, I think I'll drive. And I was thinking, there's 90 inches of snow, your flight's canceled, and you think it's a good idea instead to try driving. And it turns out that there was 1 inch of snow at his house, and all the way through Canada he was fine. 7.5 hours he drove here and got to us.
It was sunny the whole way. It was easy.
So I think it's time that we can reveal ourselves.
Oh,
Our true selves.
are you sure?
Yes.
My glasses fogged up, actually.
Well, you're a very attractive man. Oh, thank you. I also wanted to make sure we gave you, we feed these to children here in the winter. So I'll make sure you had these in case you got hungry and needed some extra energy.
It's woodpecker suet.
Yeah. They're like Michigan cakes.
Oh, are they?
There's like those pasties that I've heard about. Okay.
You just rub some whitefish on it.
Got it. Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to ask you first. My Life as a Foreign Country is obviously an interesting title. Because Stephen Colbert is not here tonight, I will in his stead ask, why do you hate America? Because really you should have called this My Life as an American Traveling. An American tourist of sorts.
Right. Because military, we often call it a tour.
Right.
A combat tour. I live in Orlando, where Mickey Mouse is right there, just across town. And I went to Bosnia before 99 to 2000, but in 2003 to 2004, I was in Iraq, and I definitely I would say a deployment, maybe with that word. But the title really comes from the idea of the separation from myself. It seems like there's a world where there's a country that I was a part of, and it became part of me. And then there's another life that I have now. And there's a separation between.
Is it also kind of true for your feelings about your childhood, and then what happens thereafter when you kind of gain more of these what we consider to be adult experiences? Though I don't consider experience to be limited to any particular age if you're paying attention. But do you in your book, it seems like you have kind of like I felt when I was kind of looking at memoir, that there was a different time. It's a time before so many of those ideas of youth are destroyed. It's before anyone's dead. Is that part of what you were thinking?
What's strange to me is that even in childhood, looking back on it, I'm with you on that, but as I look back at childhood, I see myself digging holes and digging foxholes and this kind of thing. And my dad had ranger handbooks and that kind of thing, so I could set my sector stakes and get my left and right limits and grenade sumps and the whole thing.
The grenade sumps was the one that impressed me.
Oh, nice.
I felt so outclassed. I was like, I didn't have a ranger handbook, It's raged by hippies.
Sort of the part of it, I know, right? The part of it is like me crawling out into the grass with there was no one out there in the grass, but in the imagination, the enemy was there, and the enemy was an inherited one that I didn't know, but I knew that was these ghosts from Vietnam, from World War II, that were out there in the grass.
Both of you place yourselves in history, and we'll talk. I'd like to get a couple sections from your book a little bit later on about kind of how you trace a history of these kind of experiences. And the long walk, obviously, is both a direct term for a bomb disposal technician, but also it's a long walk home, right?
Right.
So can you describe your title, please?
Sure. The title was my editor's idea, and there's some editors make a few key additions or help, I think, at certain points. When I sold the book, it was actually titled Running with Ricky. And Ricky is a character in the book who I basically speak to all throughout. And I thought Ricky was really a central part of the book. And my editors, when we were all done, and we were on line edits, we were down to just about, the last little bit. He said, "What about the long walk?" And he kind of said it with this idea that, like they had already made the cover and put the title on it, and like this is what we've done. But of course it does have two meanings. Bomb technicians, particularly in the United Kingdom, it's been called the long walk. The idea that you put on the bomb suit and you walk by yourself with nobody else to the IED, the improvised explosive device. That's been a term in the career field for decades. But yeah, it is a very long walk home from the war, right? And I think, and that comes out great in Brian's book, where I wondered as I was reading it, like, what's this book getting to? Where's the end coming? We keep coming home, and we keep coming home, and we keep coming home. And of course, that's the whole point, right? Is that there's just this time of reabsorbing.
And do you have any stories of, I remember them as the war continued, and as we tried to stay ahead of the threat, specifically with improvised explosive devices, the disguises of these bombs continued to evolve. Right. How did they begin to get? Can you give us kind of the transition? Like first, they were artillery rounds on the side of the road.
Right,
and
right. They're just they're out there, and it's like, look at that thing. And people would go up to them and kick them and stuff. Like we weren't.
I didn't.
Well, that's good for you. But there wasn't this. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into yet. And then they started hiding them. First, the big one was always the animal carcass, right? They would put it in a dead dog or a dead donkey or something. And then in a bag of trash, because there's trash all over the country.
Right.
Absolutely everywhere. But then we got pretty good at clearing all that kind of stuff off, and so then it was a pile of rocks. And then it wasn't a pile of rocks anymore, it was a hole in the ground, and they cover it with dirt. And then they put it in the hole in the ground, and they cover it with dirt, and they pour it with water over it in the wet season, and they wait for the dry season. And the thing sits there for 6 months, and it looks exactly like any other crusted over dirt anywhere in the country. And so it got to a certain point, say by 06, 07, 08, where you just assumed that there was an IED everywhere and you were simply not going to find it. That if they really wanted to hide it, there wasn't going to be a dog anymore. It was going to be completely hidden. And so then luck takes over. There's just, why step here and not there? There's no...
The randomness of death kind of consumes war, which is the hard part. After you train so long, you begin to have this gilded sense that because your skills and prowess are now at a level of competence, that it's given you an edge. And then the ground just disappears.
They just pick
you.
Yeah. And when I think military people in general, and especially bomb techs, type A control issue people like me, you plan on being in charge all the time. And of course, the only reason I'm taking apart this IED is because I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm smarter than the bomb maker. I'm smarter than the guy who tried to hide it. I'm the best person here to do this particular job. And when it really is random, that's one of those mind jobs that you learn in war.
How does that Uber control work at home?
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Hi, honey, I got it. I got all this.
I am not an easy person to live with, and God bless my wife and 4 sons, for sure. You're going to clap. We can clap for my wife. She needs it.
I agree. Have you ever seen can you take apart a bomb?
Oh, sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good news. Have you ever seen a bomb disguised as a whoopee cushion?
No.
How would you handle that?
Like an oversized novelty. whoopee cushion.
Hey, I was 11 Bravo. I think I'm going to pull security.
Yeah, are you gonna go over there? Oh, they're locking.
Yeah, well, good
wire
luck with that.
cutters.
So anyway, I just have a few of these.
Yeah,
I didn't kick them, I just took them home.
so I normally have a robot
Right, but we don't have robots. That's ridiculous. That's like the future.
and a bomb suit and explosives and a jammer.
Yeah, but if you're really got your skills
Security
worked
about 4
out,
hours from now.
Yeah, and
how hard can it be?
well, so
I saw the Hurt Locker. It looked terrible.
yeah. So if,
Oh, now we're, yeah. That
how
actually.
did you get this?
What? How dare you accuse me of.
So there's so good news.
Yeah.
There's a very simple way to disarm every bomb, and I think everybody in the room knows it, right?
Yeah. If I call that,
If
this
you-
is going to be a weird night.
Right. I think that I don't know. I think just for my nerves, maybe calling it might be a bad thing. So as everybody knows, you take apart a bomb by cutting the red wire, right? Always the red one. So if I can just, you didn't make this easy on me.
They're fused.
Can I splice it out with my fingernail? Oh, look at that. And
Are you sure the color filter isn't changing the color of the wires?
so you're not allowed to be colorblind and be a bomb tech. And the question is
probably
why?
true.
And it's because you always have to cut the red wire, right? So, and we're good.
All right.
So you and I need to talk about this, the fact that that's like a real fuse. And
There's some things, you know what it's full of, right?
oh no.
It's full of starbursts.
Oh, is
Because, the flavor explodes.
oh does it now?
Interesting story. We got a pallet of starbursts in Iraq in 2003. We couldn't get our mail. We couldn't take showers. But a pallet of starbursts showed up, and they'd been sitting in Kuwait for maybe 12 years. And they'd hardened so that, it's supposed to be a chewy candy. But they hurt to eat them. But we were into chewing on anything we could find. And eventually we started giving them to the Iraqi children, who at a certain point began to throw them back at us. So I was going to put charms in there, which we joked about. In the military, if you get the MRE, they have charms in them, but they're bad luck. Marines won't touch them in their MREs. So we're always trying to get rid of charms. And I couldn't even bring myself to buy some to put in here as a joke.
Right. That's why
because
it was
it would
funny.
have hexed the night. It would have been bad news.
So you talk about that. You're not even going to open it up and
No.
throw starburst at the.
It's going to go off at some point.
Okay, got it.
You've both written about the veteran's journey to war and back. Why do we need these books, Brian?
Why
Why do we need these books about the journey? Why do we need to, from the actual perspective of the inside, the mind of the people who go forward, experience these events, which are created by their countries and then return to their countries? Sure. Why do you think it's important for the not just the narrative of the nation, but for people who aren't veterans to read this book? Because this is not just a veteran story; it's much wider and in scope and in beauty.
Thank you. I think for me personally, I had to write it first to try to understand some things, or at least come closer to things in my life and see some of the connections that weren't quite making sense to me right off the bat. But in terms of sharing it with other people, I think part of it is because when the bomb maker walks out towards this explosive material, when the bomb maker comes home with explosive material inside of them, when the infantry soldier kicks in a door and frightens children and takes all the men of military age away, when the sergeant with an English degree writes the depositions that puts them away, it's translated into Arabic and puts them into prison, maybe still in prison to this day, with the American flag on the shoulders of all of those going towards these events. I think that journey seems singular in its scope, but really you are at war. We are at war. And we are walking into their houses. We put people into prison. And trying to connect that, I feel I'm trying to share an indictment or complicity that I feel in myself. And if it finds a home in someone else, good.
And for you?
I didn't know I was doing what you described. I thought that I was writing a really small story of something that just happened to me. and to some of my friends. In fact, I was so naive, I didn't even know that was called a memoir in the publishing industry.
Well, it's a French word.
Right. So back to Colbert. So, I thought a memoir was something you write at the end of your life when you know how everything was turns out. And I didn't know how my life was going to turn out. I thought I was going crazy, right? So I just wrote this story, and the fact that other people would say, you know what, I felt the same way.
And families.
And families feel the same way. And I'll be honest, in most of my book events, I don't talk about Iraq and Afghanistan. I talk about, or people want to talk about, Vietnam.
Right.
And they want to talk about their sister who died of cancer. And they want to talk about when a friend got in a car crash. And it's these trials that we have in our life. And I think if you're really, really lucky, a book is 2 books. A book is the book you thought you wrote. And then the book is, when other people read it, it becomes whatever it turns into, right? And one of the things that my book has turned into, at least for some people, is, hey, this veteran experience describes me too. I mean, it's extremely humbling. It's not what I don't know, it's not what I intended when I got started, I guess. I had no idea.
Yeah. For both of you, what was the first writing that led to these books? You began as a poet, but you really weren't a writer, full time, although you had the urge very early on. What was kind of the first seed which you wrote a piece and you were like, this is just going to expand like a universe. This is something that I need to grapple with all the way.
I had this idea of writing to make sense of things, and of course, human beings, we tell stories to make sense of the world. And the very first time I tried that, I was getting out of the Air Force and I was moving from Las Vegas to Buffalo. Who does that, right? Moves from Las Vegas to Buffalo. And I thought that, who does this? This would be interesting to write about. And I wrote a little essay and I got it published in Newsweek, back when Newsweek was
Still
a magazine,
yeah.
And had that My Turn column and for just outside essays. It only occurred to me later that not everybody just occurs to them to write an essay when something happens to them, right? And I had been writing a political column, which I'm glad I gave up. But I did have a moment where I thought, hey, this thing that's happening to me, other people might want to read it. And the very first section I wrote was the Kermit chapter right in the middle.
Which is interesting. It ends up being the center of the book, not
yeah,
the
and it ends up,
beginning.
and then I wrote the beginning, and then I wrote the end, and then I kind of wrote the stuff in between, and I moved it all over. But I don't know, I went in with, I'm going to write a book. And I started tracking type A control person again, tracking my daily word count and all that kind of stuff, and I was on a schedule.
And what was you had already had 2 books of poetry, a book that you put away because I threatened you over it.
That's a true story. We'll get to that later. Yeah. With a grenade, no less. Yeah. You can see his handiwork, so you got to take him seriously.
The grenade was a metaphor.
Yeah, well, there
Really?
was Ted Genoways was previously with Virginia Quarterly Review,
Right.
VQR, and he'd seen a couple of blogs that I'd done, New York Times kind of thing, and just short pieces about connected to travel, and then he contacted me because I got the Amy Lowell Traveling Fellowship, where they give you $50,000 and tell you to leave the country.
Yeah.
Which is not hard to do, So, you know what I mean? You get that chance to travel, and
Yeah, exactly.
they'll pay for you to go. It was amazing. And my wife and I, she got a half-year sabbatical that year, so we traveled together. And it seemed like every country I went to, it's the lens, of course, that I'm seeing the world through.
Sure.
I kept finding war, or traces of war, echoes, and the ruins, and among beautiful things, too, wonderful people and experiences. And so he sort of challenged me to write Haibun, and this sort of travel log prose piece, sort of short prose passages that are end capped with a haiku, right? And I tried those. I mangled the form, but the experiment got about 90 pages worth of material about travel and war, and it was really confusing. I sent it to him, and then we weeded it down and whittled down to about 22 pages, which became this chapter called My Life as a Foreign Country. And then I knew, like, a book announced itself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, like one sentence. What was the hardest part of writing a book? Was it getting through to the end? Was it beginning? What was the hardest thing about creating an entire? I mean, look at that. Like,
It's not that big.
it is big. It's so much longer than a poem and
The
an
hardest
essay.
part is on a Tuesday in February when you're 25,000 words in, like writing something, the writing's not hard, it's the feeling that you're making progress. And then the next day doing it again and doing it again and doing it again. Which is, of course, now my whole job, every day. But at the time, the first time,
Yeah.
it was...
And how about a little story about the actual editing process? Once you thought you were done and you sent it to someone who said, yeah, about that.
Well, I mean, one thing was the title, but the other one, I think the main addition, and my editor would agree with this, the main addition is the amount that my wife is in there. And she was in there hardly at all, mostly because I felt like I couldn't speak for her, and I was really claustrophobic and caught in my own head, and I don't know, she had this other experience, and I didn't want to presume that I knew what it was, right? And he said, we need 5% more Jesse. And so a lot of the parts that people like best, and in the opera, actually, you know, it's the parts with my wife. She humanizes the whole thing.
And we'll listen to a little bit of that opera actually in a bit. And how about you with the editing process? Because your book is, you know, it shifts and moves. It kind of comes into itself through all kinds of different perspectives, all by you, but you dip into history, you dip into all these different places, and then you still circle back into the epicenter of all this.
I had a similar sort of cycling or recycling or revisiting kind of motion, but I initially I thought after that first chapter, then I decided to have 9 chapters, one for each muse, you know, so the 9 muses would be the construct.
Poets, man.
So I wrote this, yeah, right, so I wrote this entire book.
Oh yeah, I got that, totally.
Well, no.
The whole time.
No, then there was a version out there, and this gets back to that. If I put it in one sentence, it would be related to the first question. Then I realized that this is unreadable. This isn't working in a lot of ways, and so I ended up dropping entire chapters, and like that 90 pages that went to 22, now we had a book that was shifted back down, and then had to re-expand.
Right.
Yeah, and then I took. Before there was like one chapter was a 3-act play, one chapter was actually a collection of haibun, and then et cetera, et cetera. So each chapter had its own culture. And then so I went back to that fundamental chapter and I realized this chapter is doing something intriguing that I think I could learn from more than the others. The others were interesting, like artistic tries, you know, or experiments, but they weren't really getting to the things I needed, this cycling motion that I really wanted to explore. Yeah.
Did Horse Soldiers by Doug Stanton influence or heavily influence your work?
Is there a standard above heavily? Where's the?
I would love, you know, I'd like to get a small reading from both of you because you talk about kind of your place in history, which I think is interesting because, you know, everyone kind of at some point has to reckon with that. You know, we're all here right now. There's been now before. There's going to be now again. But this is our now. And how do we relate to this chain of people, of this movement of humanity? Would you be so kind, Brian, why don't you start off first with a section, and feel free to use the talking chair.
The talking, you mean
if you like, yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Just a small section from the book there.
I'm going to need that.
Yeah, that was important. White paper is...
I said infantry because I didn't really know if I could do it, if I could take it, if it would break me down and chew me up and then continue to keep on chewing. I said infantry because I knew that here is a portion of what work is. Here was a portion of what they fed to the lions in the dust and name of Rome. I said infantry because my great-grandfather Carter was gassed during the Battle of Moussa Argonne in the fall of 1918, the bloodiest battle in American history. He was there in France during the First World War, and yet he still managed to crawl out through the ruined ground. The world rung into a gear-toothed roar, canisters of gas hissing as they flew over, and he made it back home, though the war would drag him under a few short years later. I said infantry because one of my great-greats enlisted in the Union Army at Cumberland Gap, Tennessee, and later served as a corporal in the Tennessee Volunteers. And even though he cracked his back on a green horse at Camp Dennison and later contracted rheumatic fever during a bitter December in Knoxville, he stayed on through the fight. From the Confederate horses shot in the river at Shelbyville and on to Huntsville, Alabama. From Bucktown Tavern to Powder Springs to the siege of Atlanta. From the Battle of Franklin, the Battle of Nashville, and the pursuit of General John Bell Hood clear to the Tennessee River. I raised my hand and said the words, "I swear," because I would have been ashamed in the years to come if I hadn't, even if it didn't make sense, even if nobody I cared about ever thought about it, even if all the veterans in my family never said a word, or even if they did, saying, "It's cool, Brian. It doesn't mean a thing. Believe me, the uniform doesn't make the man," or anything along those lines, because it would have meant that between me and the people I revered most, there were beaches and jungle foliage and Russian MiGs and snipers and artillery craters and midnights spent drifting on the Pacific under the Southern Cross. Between me and the people I most revered, there were explosions I couldn't hear, curses and shouting and laughter, engines thrumming, Hueys and Blackhawks lifting from the grass and sand to map the earth, and medevac flights that would later deliver the wounded to gentle hands and latex gloves. Surgeons calling for scalpels and sutures and more blood, type AB negative, while the airmen on the flight line hosed bodily fluids from the decks and drank coffee when the day was done.
What do you think when you leave the gate? When you leave the protective enclosure and false security of your ringed base? I thought of an uncle filling a C-130 with bullet holes over the tiny jungle airstrips in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. A grandfather who built the double runway on Guam in 1944. Another grandfather who landed in southern France and marched to Berlin. A great-great-grandfather, a lumberjack and pig farmer from North Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, fresh from the boat in the Kaiser's army, who at the age of 41, and with 7 of his eventual 9 children at home, left his plow in the field to march south with the 63rd Pennsylvania Volunteers to the Peninsula Campaign and the Second Battle of Bull Run. He returned 10 months later with a bullet hole and a Purple Heart. How would I return? Thoughts drift further as the dust and palm groves and empty desert landscape crawl by outside the thick windows of the armored truck. Does the thin line go back further? How far? What blood runs in my veins? Am I from a line of old? What may rise in me, unbidden and unknown, to meet this oldest of challenges? How many battlefields has my blood made wet, and empires made and gone, on bare green islands and cold forested mountains of myth, in lands whose names have changed countless times? How many arrows have I dodged? How many rifles have hung from my shoulder? How many bandages have I wrapped? How many helmets have I worn in the line of my people all the way back to the beginning? What resides hidden in me, lying in wait to be revealed, once the cycle continues and renews?
Did you find it interesting that those two passages exist in two entirely different thinking writers?
I promise you that we didn't read each other's stuff either, I guess.
His came out first.
I kind of do the same thing in my own. And what that doesn't speak to is the other side of what happens. That blends some of the romance and history of all of our progression as families. But did you read anything before Iraq that was destroyed by the truth of war when you got there? Was there any particular passage or poems or books that you were like, this is something I need to participate in, and then you get there and you're delivered the full palette of what it really is, and you go, how could I have willingly gone forward thinking that this was somehow something I needed to do?
I'm not one to ban books, and I believe in the freedom of the voice to participate in the full round of the circle that we've gathered for centuries, one voice after another, one story at a time. I believe in that. But at the same time, I can never do this again. In the house, when you look through the bookshelves and you're looking for that book, the one I won't find is by Rupert Brooke. I won't find his books on my shelves anymore.
Interesting. How about you?
There's this tradition, American military tradition, since, World War I and in the poets, or although that started with the Brits, of course. It's certainly in Slaughterhouse-Five and Catch-22 and the things they carried, and we could go on and on. It's the The American story is the American wants to go, and both of our passages were about before going, right? It's how it's what you wonder about yourself before you go. And then you go and you come back and you've learned something terrible. That's the American military story. There are, there's a book like, I think it's called Reign of Steel. It's a German book about World War I, which basically, it's the antithesis of All Quiet on the Western Front. It's yes, there's this terrible war, and look at all of the wonderful glory in it. And despite all these things that happen, it maintains that. That doesn't make sense to me. I should also say, though, that like entire classes of American literature don't make sense to me anymore. Things like, I don't know, finding the drama in, Updike finds all this drama in infidelity and all that, it's like the central theme of lots of his writing. I'm like, I just can't find the drama in that. I don't know. I'm just like, the things that I've put my wife through, I don't know, things about loyalty and everything else, I guess that's what sticks with me. All that stuff just doesn't rise to the occasion quite the same way. It seems to be lots of navel gazing, and we're just kind of like stuck in our own circle instead of,
Not Navy.
Yes, no.
Terms out there. Joe has put up with me an awful lot. He's in the back. He does all the sound work here and sets the entire stage up for us. And now I've already forgotten exactly which musical note I had queued up at first. But is it Brian Turner playing bass in a rock band? Brian, can you speak to this for a moment before we play it?
Well, one of the great pleasures I have is tinged with a deep sadness, and that is that a band, since I was about 7 years old, probably my biggest artistic influence was a man named Brian Voigt, who was really like closer to me than my brother was. And he died in December of 2012 of stomach cancer. And he was a guitar player in the band I played in. You won't hear him except maybe just a little bit in the very back if you've got a tuned ear. And but he, in the back of the memoir, there's a link to a song so you can hear. And actually, you can go to the website and listen to a song. And it feels like this book is a chance to, in some way, also bring him back so that his music can be enjoyed in some way. This is me playing. Do you want the technical stuff?
Back to zero. Is it true that you took poetry classes in order to write better lyrics for your rock band?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Who does that?
Actually, quite a few people. I was at Fresno State. I had hair halfway down my back. Used to wear a little skeleton earring. Played bass. He's a drummer. Also, I don't know if you know that. But.
That's great. I'm excited. Let's hear a little bit of Brian.
Sure.
And you wrote the lyrics for that song.
Thanks for those guys.
Now, that's respectable. And the lyrics coming from a poet is even more respectable. I came from the 80s, as some of us did. Any 80 people who were influenced by hair bands from the 80s? Like maybe Def Leppard? You're a good person. Fine citizen. Joe, could you maybe educate everybody else who missed the 80s? Come on, feel that power?
Love is like a bomb, baby. Come get it on. Living like a lover with a radar phone. Looking like a tramp, like a video vamp. Demolition woman, can I be your man? Razzle and dazzle, a flash, a little light. Television lover, baby, go all night. Sometime, anytime, sugar me sweet. Little Miss I, innocent, sugar me, yeah. Come on, baby. Take a bottle, shake it up, break the bubble, break it up. Pour some sugar on me. Oh. In the name of love, pour some sugar on me. Come on, fire me up. Put your sugar on me. Oh, I can't get enough.
I knew you'd come through for me.
Did that just happen?
Yes.
Part of me is like, did I just do that?
And this is a segue, obviously. That's what I specialize in. Those are the worst lyrics ever written, but the greatest song. So there's a great power to the music at the time, but they just couldn't write anything other than crayons on duct tape. And I wanted to see if Brian could restore it to profundity, which he did. I mean, you heard him.
Right.
You know? And for a few, before I knew Brian, I'd read Here Bullet, and I'd read it in my voice. I hadn't read it in the way he actually reads his poetry. And so I'd like you to come read a poem in the way that I forever will hear your poetry now, if you'd like to go up and talk to the big chair. It's transformational, and I think it's interesting when you hear a poet especially read their own work in their own voice with with their placement of importance on words, with the power they intended for it to be heard in. It's a great opportunity. So,
And this one, Brian, it's thinking of you as well here. Katusha rockets. The 107s have a crackling sound of fire and electricity, of air-ruckled heat. And when they pinwheel over the rooftops of Haman al-Alil, they just keep going, traveling for years over the horizon to land in the meridians of Divisadero Street, where I'm standing early one morning on a Memorial Day in Fresno, California. The Veterans Parade scattering at the impact, mothers shielding their children by instinct, old war vets crouching behind automobiles as police set up an outer cordon for the unexploded ordnance. Rockets often fall in the night sky of the skull. Down long avenues of the brain's myelin sheathing, over synapses and the rough structures of thought, they fall into the hippocampus, into the seat of memory, where lovers and strangers and old friends entertain themselves, unaware of the dangers headed their way. Or that I will need to search among them, the way the bomb disposal tech walks tethered and alone down Divisadero Street, suited up as if walking on the moon's surface, as a crowd watches just how determined he is to dismantle death, to take it apart piece by piece, the bravest thing I've ever seen.
and now I always have his voice in my head. I worry about putting his voice on other things that I read. And I'm beginning to give him credit for everything that I read, because I love reading his work. Here Bullet was the first poem I ever heard by Brian Turner, and it made me afraid. I thought I was going to get shot. It's one of those really explosive poems, but I hadn't read it that way. I read it straight up and kind of cold, and that's the amazing thing sometimes about words. Do you have favorite words? Do you collect them like I do? Like, hey, I'm going to use this someday because it's just a great word.
There was one in that poem, actually. I love the word ruckled.
Ruckled,
That is good.
which I've never used.
Yeah.
My favorite word is oubliette.
What?
Oubliette, and I thought I worked it in. I did a review of Hassan Blasum's book, Corpse Exhibition, for NPR, and I snuck it in there. And the producer said, "We don't say oubliette on NPR." like it's a curse word or something.
Right.
And they said, "Can you use another word?" And I said, "A dark hole from which there is no escape." And they said, "Yeah, that's good." And then they said, "Okay, this piece is too long. We need to cut 3 seconds." And I said, "Okay, can we put oubliette back in?" But you don't say oubliette on the radio.
No.
So yes, that's someday I'll work in oubliette.
How about words you hate? Like, there's certain words I will never in my life use. I will never use the word winningest.
Well, that's terrible.
It's terrible. But someone came up with it, and they use it in sports all the time. So I have this list. I will quote someone as saying that's still legal for me, because it's not me saying it. I'm quoting somebody, even if it's fiction. But I won't reuse it in prose. I won't even use the word like copacetic, because it just feels like antiseptic. It feels like a cure for something that itches. But down south, it means it's cool. Whenever I hear the word, I just imagine Matthew McConaughey saying,
Yeah.
That's copacetic.
Yeah, that's good.
It's all right. It's cool. Do you have words like that make you twitch a little bit? And
I don't use the word pedantic because I don't think you can use it without being it. So that one I
Bam.
skip. That one I skip permanently, I guess.
I don't know about words, but I have like two phrases or two. There's one is price point. I just don't like hearing that. Can you just say how much does it cost? Right. Price point just seems fancy or leaves a little bit of embellishment on it. And the other thing I don't like, and I'm hoping we can maybe start changing, is it's not so much the phrase, but it's that there isn't. It's opposite, and that is, you guys hear this all the time. She's the most independent woman I know. I hate that.
she's the most independent.
You never hear, so I want to start saying, let's just start saying, that Turner, he's the most independent man I know. When have you heard that?
I hear it a lot. Because my wife is the most independent woman I know. But followed twice by my daughters they think they're independent. I hate double words like non-starter and no-brainer. They make my head hurt when I write them out. How about jingoism?
Jingoism, yeah.
That's something we should be talking about because patriotism is kind of the yelling of war, but jingoism, it sounds once again like I should be treated for that.
Right.
Hey doc, I don't want to talk about it in the waiting room, but I have a little case of jingoism. Have you got some copacetic for that? How do you guys deal with those words when you see them? Are there things that offend you in other writing, or do you kind of just glass it over and go, well, that's a way of saying it?
I don't know. I try to let go. I try to. I don't know. I guess I don't get quite. I don't get quite as bothered. But I think your point is sound. Katie Schultz, who I think that we know, she wrote a great book called Flashes of War. She has no military background. She wrote this really true war story by sitting in her cabin in North Carolina and just thinking about it. And she said the reason that she got into it is because she realized words like patriotism, speaking of that, had come to take on a different meaning. And she thought that was worth exploring when we use a word that used to mean one thing and now it's turned into meaning something else. And I think
Like contractor or
Right.
when you carry a weapon, not somebody who teaches something or fixes something,
Right.
but someone.
How about
when we
interesting-
hire them, they're contractors. With somebody else, it's a mercenary.
Yeah. Some people call
or a
the military
sanction,
mercenaries.
A sanction when you're flying over and
Paid.
bombing people. That's,
Right, yeah.
Yeah. How about military terms? When we talk about words that get transformed into, bizarre collections of English abuse. Like they just abuse the language in horrible ways in the military sometimes by, kind of, these two words are going to mean all the stuff we want to say, and we're going to put it on boxes and MREs. Are there any, military terms you heard, wow, I've never really?
yeah, right off the bat is in the Army, and there's different, hua, which means everything. You can use it in any, hua, 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 hua. There's many more variations. Those are just some. So
Right, yeah.
But I'm talking about an actual word.
No, that's a word in the military. That and the
No,
F
no, no,
word,
no. I know
those two
it's- I know it's a
combined is
thing.
basically the vocabulary of the grunt.
Yeah. We use, hoo-yah is also the same kind of thing, hand me that hoo-yah, and it's just whatever you're looking at.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
I don't have time to say wrench.
I prefer the Navy way where everything is a hoo-yah, and it really
Yeah.
does make things much easier.
Plane, tank, all hoo-yahs.
I
Fork.
think actually the best one in the EOD bomb squad world is when things explode, we say they come from together. I don't know, it's actually
like
kind
that,
of
though.
poetic as well.
Yeah, I like
so.
that.
Well, if it's one we like, then I like it's a significant emotional event. That's when you have the shit scared out of you. It's a significant emotional event.
Yeah. Or if you have to take a shit, it's a gross weight adjustment.
Like that. Yeah. Well, that 107 that I just talked about in that poem going over, that was right under that category.
Yeah, gross weight adjustment. Is either drop a bomb, it's your plane dropping a bomb, or I have to go to the head.
Yeah. Right.
And take a dump. You write narrative poetry. How was that? I mean, which is, one way of each one of your poems is a little story. How was it kind of transferring from writing with that sense of crystalline language, where you're using the fewest words possible, to writing prose, where all your pages got equally wide. All your sentences had to go from one side to the other and stack up with some kind of regularity versus the ability to work in free verse. How was that for you?
I enjoy it, and I enjoyed it, and I continue to enjoy it. It's
I prefer it if you were suffering. That was hard.
well, I do, as I realize, because the reason is it feels like the poem feels like the stanza. I was talking earlier today. The stanza, the root of that in Italian means room, at least one of the derivations. And room by room, stanza by stanza, you sort of construct these vehicles, these spaces. And when I was in combat writing Here Bullet, in that poem that I wrote, that I just read, it seemed like it was the right vehicle rather than a long narrative, because I couldn't find a sense of continuity. Continuity was boredom, punctuated by this bizarre, difficult event, whether it was 2 seconds or 36 hours, and then back to boredom again, Yeah. So the poem seemed like the right vehicle for that. But then when I came home, and over the years trying to figure out generationally even, if to get your question, prose feels like the walls are sort of knocked down, and you have this wide landscape, a wide canvas, to sort of look at the connections both on the field of our time, but then also the deep history that we stand upon.
That's fascinating. Do you guys have any writing habits? Let's start with you. Like things you kind of do. I mean, do you wear latex gloves? Do you put on a beard?
Yes, I do.
Do you only write in the rain when you can cry? I mean, how do you kind of go, okay, I'm going to sit down in this room and transfer a world onto all?
Yeah, I'm kind of fussy about it. It takes me, I need prolonged, persistent exposure to it. So I can't sit down and write for 30 minutes. I need 6 hours. And I spend the first 3 hours remembering the voice of the work that I'm in. And then I manage to write some other stuff kind of at the end. And I have this crutch where I still run a lot. I run 15, 20 miles a week if I can. And I do all my writing in my head while I run. And then as soon as I get into the computer, I scribble everything down, handwrite it, and then it's just a matter of remembering all that. But I think it was Hemingway talks in his Paris Review interview about always end in the middle, so you know where to start the next day. And I think there's something to that, but I reread, if I'm writing a chapter, I start at the beginning of the chapter every time, and I read through the chapter, and I edit, write a little more, then the next day, edit, write a little more, and so that way you hopefully get something coherent.
Interesting.
There's a similarity that I wouldn't have had before writing the prose, and then my agent actually suggested this to me, and she said to try reading from the beginning up to where you are every time, and then see if more comes, and so that's what I would try to do. And in the beginning, that was no problem, but after a while, I gotta read, okay. So, but I really wanted to get a sense of the mood of the work. One of the things just a practical, not latex gloves, but I put on these headphones sometimes, because I live in Orlando and there's a lot of distracting noise, and I have a sort of a selection of music I like with no lyrics, so they're pretty, I just sort of swells that drop and rise and drop, and I'll put a song on repeat if I want a certain kind of mood, and I get soundtracks, I guess, and then I just put that on repeat till it's wallpaper sound. I don't even hear it anymore. And then I can get into a space.
Are they songs with lyrics in them? Are there words?
No. Well, no.
Do you write in a stance with your hands thrown down?
My wife and I write together often. I'm not the same piece, but there is a definite, I have this working writer in the house with me. It's amazing.
Is it back to back or separate rooms?
No, in another room. I have the office, but we keep the door open, so we're sort of yelling, oftentimes in the house, or if she's further away, or just talking.
Listen to this sentence.
Yeah. Right? So I have a purple pen that she always uses. I bought a box of them, and then she goes through the first draft of everything, and I always get defensive, and I'm like, that's not good. And then I come back and I'm like, well, it's pretty good, So yeah.
Did Jessie read through your book as it evolved, and
no.
Was she horrified by it when it was born?
I didn't let her read it because it was so personal that I felt like any critique with the purple pen would be a critique of me and our marriage and everything else. And I think she was really convinced that all day long, I was typing all work and no play makes Brian a very dull boy. And I think on one level, she was genuinely surprised when a book came out the other end, but she didn't read it until we had sold it. And then my editor said, she's read this right. Not really. Oh, well, she really needs to do that. So she was in San Francisco at a conference, and I emailed it to her, and she read it on the flight back.
Really?
From San Francisco in one sitting. Wow. And then we had a very long talk.
A gross weight adjustment.
Yes. Right.
I'm guessing that would have gone weird. Reviews, we all get reviews. Do you guys have anything from reviews that have kind of stuck with you? Either they've been hilarious, misplaced, or kind of baffling? Because you get those. It's someone else examining your work from a different perspective, which of course is healthy, unless they don't get your work. Anything come to mind from your years of people saying, I read your book, take it back?
I've had several things. One was disturbing, the poem Pure Bullet, for example. Just that poem. Somebody read it, and I guess on a blog, was talking about suicide and saying, yeah, like Turner gets it, like, yeah, like, as if it was promoting that, and it's not anywhere near, it's nowhere near the field of, and I have a wide sort of open space where I think a poem can land, and I felt like that was not anywhere near where I wanted to be with that. And I've had to others where, like with the current book, this one guy quoted a line talking about, and there's a passage that talks about mortuary affairs school where we're learning about these dead bodies, and they had some of us lay in the grass, and he was telling us about how you put flags near them to mark them and that kind of thing. And I had a descriptive line that talked about the blades of grass, which is a nod to Whitman, right? And basically the line I thought was, I tried to make it beautiful and artful, talking about sort of the translucent nature of the light going through the grass, illuminating its sort of infinite nature or something. It's different phrasing, but, and then he quoted that line and said, huh? and I kind of felt like, it's saying the body's here, the grass here. It didn't seem that hard to get. So.
A lot of the initial reviews that came out all said that my book was raw and earnest, which I've now learned since is code for needed editing, naive, didn't know what he was, half-baked, should have had more time. And
and we disagreed on that.
I know, we've talked about this and disagree. There was one review that started off with, when I got this book, my thought was just what we need, another crazy book from another crazy vet. And in some ways, I don't know, like that was exactly the point. Like I felt like I was turning into a stereotype and a caricature of myself and the crazy vet. And I don't know, I used the word for a reason, and I was trying to like move through that and past that. It ended up being a better review by the end, but if you just read the first sentence, then, well, yes, it's another crazy book by another crazy vet.
I got one that said, hated it, that's all.
Fair enough.
And so I checked to see what it was a Goodreads thing, and all they read were, fantasy horror stuff, and they thought Dust to Dust was obviously a vampire book.
Oh, right.
which would have disappointed them, in truth. Let's go back to Jesse. This is the amazing thing is Brian Castner's book has been turned into an opera. It's going to be happening. I'm going. Yeah, it's going to be in Saratoga in the spring. Do you think it would be cool if we listened to a little piece of it? It's still being developed, so this is kind of an early stage. But could we listen to a little piece of your wife, or the character of your wife singing?
Yes, Opera Jessie. We've got Heather Johnson sings my wife, and Danny Belcher sings me, and we've started to refer to them as Opera Brian and Opera Jessie, and they've become good friends, actually. So we've got a little piece. The opera opens. One great thing about the opera is they took, there are things that work way better in the opera than work in the book, and one of them is Jessie is a fully realized character, and her struggle with the family, I think, is actually the narrative line that moves the opera through. And she opens the opera, and I think we're going to listen to the very beginning of Jessie's aria, And if you've read the book, you know that one of the things that I put in there was when I first deployed, Jessie went to her grandmother and said, how do I deal with Brian coming home, looking for some of this World War II advice? And her grandmother's response was, well, Brian's never going to come home. He's going to die over there, or he's going to come home a different person. And that's the frame that they use, that's how the opera opens. So that's what we're going to.
That's incredibly powerful. Joe, if you would be so kind.
And I should say this is the workshop, so it's guitar, piano, and voice, and then it'll be in full orchestration next summer.
It's heavy.
Yeah, Heather's amazing.
It must be amazing to see it transform so much. I'd love to, before we take some questions, I would love to hear you both read one more passage, kind of a longer passage from your books that kind of let us feel a little bit more what they're about, if you'd be so kind.
Can I go first? Sure. Sorry. I'm really not trying to breathe heavy here.
There's a lot of that in National Writer Series.
Okay, here we go. This is about, one of the jobs I did oftentimes was, it seemed like for months, was kicking in people's doors and raiding their homes. The soldiers into the house. The soldiers into the house. Soldiers determined and bored and searing with adrenaline enter the house with shouting and curses and muzzle flash, det cord and 5.56 millimeter ball ammunition. The soldiers into the house with pixelated camouflage, flex cuffs, chem lights, door markings, duct tape. The soldiers enter the house with ghillie suits and Remington sniper rifles, Phoenix beacons and night vision goggles, lasers invisible to the naked eye, rotor blades, Hellfire missiles, bandoliers strapped across their chests. They enter the house one fire team after another, and they fight brutal, dirty, nasty, the only way to fight. The soldiers enter the house with the flag of their nation sewn on the sleeves of their uniforms. They enter the house with Toledo and Baton Rouge imprinted on the rubber soles of their desert combat boots. They enter the house and shout, "Honey, I'm home, and here's Johnny." Soldiers enter the house with conversations of Monday Night Football and the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. They enter the house with obscenities rolling off their tongues. They enter the house with paperbacks in their cargo pockets, Starship Troopers and Black Hawk Down. We were soldiers once and young. The soldiers enter the house straight out of Compton or with Eminem saying, "Look, if you had one shot or one opportunity." They enter the house with their left foot. They enter the house the way one enters cemeteries or unclean places. They enter the house with their insurance policies filled out, signed, beneficiaries named, last will and testament sealed in manila envelopes half a world away. They enter the house having just ordered a new set of chrome mufflers on eBay for the Mustang stored under blankets in a garage north of San Francisco. They enter the house with only 9 credits earned toward an associate's degree in history from the University of Maryland. They kick in the door and enter the house with the memory of backyard barbecues on their minds. They kick in the door while cradling their little sisters in their arms. They kick in the door and pull in the toboggans and canoes from the hillsides and lakes of Minnesota. They kick in the door and bring in the horses from the barn, hitching them kitchen table inside. The soldiers into the house with Mrs. Ingram from second grade at Villain Elementary School and Mrs. Garupa from Madera High. They kick in the door and enter the house with their arms filled with all the homework they ever did and sit down to consider the quadratic equation, the Socratic method. The soldiers into the house to sit cross-legged on the floor as the family inside watches on, watches how the soldiers interrogate them, saying, how do I say the word for friend in Arabic? How do I say the word love? How do I tell you that Private Miller is dead, that Private Miller has holes in the top of his head? What is the word for ghosts in Arabic? And how many live here? And are the ghost bath party supporters? Are the ghosts here with us now? Can you tell us where the ghosts are hiding? And where the ghosts keep their weapons cache and where they sleep at night? And what can you tell us about Alibaba? Is there an Alibaba in the neighborhood? The soldiers into the house and take off their dusty combat boots and pull out an anthology of poetry from an assault pack, Iraqi Poetry Today, and commence reading poems aloud. The soldiers say, this is war then, all is well. They say, the missiles bomb the cities and the airplanes bid the clouds farewell. The soldiers remove their flak vests and turn off their radios. They smile and stretch their arms, one of them yawning, another asking for a second cup of chai. The soldiers give chocolates to the frightened little children in the shadows of the house. The soldiers give chocolates to the frightened little children and teach them how to say and how to flip off the world. The soldiers recite poetry as trays of chai and tea and cigarettes are brought into the room. The soldiers, there in the candlelight of the front room, with the Iraqi men of military age zip-tied with flex cuffs, kneeling, sandbags over their heads, read verses from Iraqi Poetry Today. The soldiers switch off their night vision goggles and set their padded helmets on the floor while the frightened little children pretend to eat the chocolates they've been given, their mothers shushing them when they begin to cry. And the soldiers, men from Kansas and California, Tacoma and College Station, these soldiers remove the gloves from their hands to show the frightened little children how they mean them no harm, how American the soldiers are, how they might bring in a pitcher of water for the bound and blinded men to drink from soon, perhaps if there's time, and how they read poetry for them, their own poetry in English, saying, between time and time, between blood and blood, all is well. All is well, the soldiers say. The soldiers kick in the doors and into the house and zip-tie the men of military age and shush the women and the frightened little children and drink the spoon sugar stirred into the hot chai and remove their stinking boots and take off their flak vests and stack their weapons and turn off their night vision goggles and say to the frightened little children softly, with their palms held out in the most tender of gestures they can offer, their eyes as brown as the hills that lead to the mountains or as blue as the rivers that lead to the sea, saying, all is well, little ones, all is well.
I'm so glad Brian read that. I've heard him read it a couple times now, and it's by far my favorite section from My Life as a Foreign Country. I just think it's amazing. I wanted to say very quickly before I read my passage. My passage is about the Brotherhood of VOD techs. This is actually my second trip to Traverse City. I was here almost 3 years ago, unfortunately, to put one of my brothers in the ground. Matthew Schwartz was, who I've discovered is there are still memorials and fundraisers and everything else. For Matthew, he was a very good friend of mine. He and Jenny and the girls were stationed with my wife and I. They're people very, very important to us. And when we came almost 3 years ago, now up to Traverse City, I have to tell you that when the day of the funeral, and it's about 3 degrees, and it was about a 7-mile drive from the church to the cemetery, and all of Traverse City was lined up the entire way, waving and holding signs. It was very important to the brotherhood that was there. So thank you very much. And I'm happier to come back under much better circumstances. My section that I'm going to read, all you need to know is that an IED has gone off, and I fell to the ground, and the Iraqi police had been shooting at it and trying to take it apart before they got there, and we sent in the robot, and it was a concrete block, and we tried to lift it, and the thing detonated. When the IED detonated 20 yards away, it tore the 400-pound robot to pieces, mangled it beyond recognition, leaving only the rear stump of an amputated arm and a single set of knobby tracks behind. The blast set molten metal fire and jagged rock in all directions, blowing out the windows and tires of the soft-skinned Iraqi police trucks and peppering the broadside of our armored Humvee. Keener and Mengerhausen, two guys on my team, were safe from the frag in the truck. Castleman had taken cover behind the engine block, when he recognized the danger of the fake trigger mechanism. By luck or unconscious habit, I had kept the bulk of the Humvee's cab between me and the IED. Only my shins and the top of my head were exposed. I calmly patted down my legs and boots and was amazed to find no blood. I tried to stand and found myself only slightly steadier. All about me, our security was suddenly energized, the platoon sergeant barking orders for his turret gunners to wake up and scan rooftops for gunmen. The Iraqi police huddled to the side, confused, except for the Weasley mustache detective who had cut off the hoax black box. He waved his arms in the air and wailed that he was stupid and suicidal and would never walk up to a bomb again. I raised my rifle to my cheek and looked through my optics across the river and into the slums. The sight picture bounced violently. I checked my grip and my arm placement. Every muscle remembered where to go. Why can't I get a steady shot? I lashed onto the rifle tighter, but I still couldn't settle it. I took a deep breath, just as I was taught, and tried again. The red dot danced from riverbed to sky. "Hey, Captain, you okay?" called Castleman, checking in, confirming the safety of the team. "Yeah, I'm good," I called back. "You sure?" he said again, and he pointed to my leg. I looked down. My left leg was bucking and shaking uncontrollably, twitching like a dead animal in its throes. I willed my leg to be still, but it was possessed, and the wild spasms continued unabated. No wonder I couldn't shoot and could barely stand. As the physical symptoms of the coursing adrenaline took over, my veins began to boil. Detachment yielded to anger, shock to bloodlust. They tried to kill me. Damn, this place, we're going home. I raised my rifle and scanned rooftops again, but smartly, no silhouettes remained after the detonation. I wanted a target, somewhere to vent my frustration and powerlessness, but none appeared. The weapons of our security stayed quiet too, and an odd silence settled as it became clear that the booby trap was not a signal for an ambush. "I'm going down," announced Castleman. "The f*** you are," answered Keener. "I am," said Castleman. "Someone has to clear it, and we don't have another robot. Get the bomb suit, put it on me. I'm doing the search for secondaries alone, and then we're going to get the f*** out of here." The long walk. Armor on, girded with breastplate and helm and leggings and collar, 80 pounds of mailed Kevlar. No one can put on the bomb suit alone. Your brother has to dress you. Overalls pulled up, massive jacket tucked, earnest in its careful thoughtfulness. One last check, face shield down, and then into the breach alone. Though there is no more direct confrontation of wills between bomber and EOD technician than the long walk. Donning the suit, living behind rifle and security to outwit your opponent nose to nose. The lonely seeking of hidden danger, to ensure no more hazards lie in wait to snatch the next soldier to pass that way, the next EOD brother or sister, the next local shopkeeper or taxi driver or child playing in a garbage-laden sewer. No one takes the long walk lightly, only after every other option is extinguished, only after robots fail and resources dwindle. The last choice always. But when the choice comes, when the knife's edge between folly and reason finally tips, training affords a decisiveness to guide your higher purpose. Castleman went so Keener didn't have to, so Mengerhausen didn't have to, so I didn't have to. You take the long walk for your brother's wife, your brother's children, and their children, and the line unborn. No greater love does one brother have for another than to take the long walk. Thank you.
Let's bring up the lights and take some questions from this brave audience that's come through with the Michigan snow. We didn't know if anyone was going to come tonight, you know.
Hi, I'm wondering if your perspective and your stories are ultimately directed against the U.S. Various actions in Iraq, or whether there's the more universal point against U.S. war elsewhere, or anyone going to war, when you think about more the political import of both of your writings. Thank you.
Is it okay to ask a question back?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little odd, but what do you think? What do you hear? Huh. Is that okay? I mean, do we do that here in Traverse City?
I heard Iraq, but I guess I'm always listening for where war is going in the future and you know, what message you're trying to convey in terms of where we're headed.
I guess I would say that all I was trying to do was write something true. We talked today about that with the students at the Front Street.
Front Street Writers Program, right?
That all you're trying to do is just write one true sentence. So I don't know, I'm really suspicious of politics and the political process. So I try to step back and lay out a very, what I consider, I just try to be completely even-handed about it. I can't be objective, but I try to be even-handed. And so I have pro-war people say, I love your book, and I have anti-war people say, I love your book, and they maybe go to different parts, and sometimes they go to the same parts, as proof that I'm on their side. And I guess what I would say is, I'd like to think that I wrote a Rorschach test in some way, and if you read this and you say, wow, war's a really terrible thing, and maybe we should either not be doing it or do it under very specific circumstances, I guess I would agree with you. At the same time, you know, since Homer, we've all been writing the same book, right? And mostly cautionary tales and warnings to 18-year-olds and to the political leaders who would send those volunteers in. And nobody's listened yet, and the warning to one is the challenge to the next. And so I step back and I just try to do, I don't know, I just try to say, you know what, in case, if you don't know what our country signed up for, this is at least the tiniest little piece of it.
I think it's really well said. I believe that art finishes in the perceiver, and that's a great dialogue. That's one of the honors of having someone other than my mom and dad read my work. I refuse to go. I've been invited by politicians to different rallies on both sides of the aisle. Why are there two? Shouldn't there be many more? I don't know. And they even have colors like football teams, you know? I don't know. I'm registered independent only because of the name independent, not because of the independent party platform.
You're the most independent man I know.
Yes! Yes! Exactly. Thank you, sir. Yeah. I do believe that art works in political ways. It does affect us, but I believe it finishes in the reader. Each of us brings our world to the piece, and it's completed in us and by us if we're actively engaged with it. That's about as far as I want to go with it. I had a few things that I think showed my hand were on things about, say, for example, the war in Iraq, and I edited those out, actually. And I think that was to the best. Otherwise, my editor was savvy, and she told me, said, hey, if you take this out, look what the work does, you know, because it was polemical with that in there. And then with it out, it created a space where, you know, those who I may think, I may be preaching to the choir, they might be with me, or those who, maybe those I might most want to talk to or invite into a conversation through art. That's what I'm hoping to do.
Isn't it exciting we're going back to Iraq?
Yeah. Do you mind?
Yes. No,
Do you mind me saying this? For years after, I came back in 2005. For several years, there was a very active, it felt like, at least in my family and among friends, very active political conversation. This very conversation just got started. And then it felt like the narrative didn't change. The journalism, the story was the same. It was some bomb in some village we never go to. So many people killed, so many people wounded. Same story tomorrow, next week, da-da-da-da. And after a while, everybody knew how I felt about it in my family politically. And so this kind of language, you know, talking about war in Iraq and politics and journalism and stories. But art, over the years I've found, and that's what I love about your work, and that's what I tried to do with mine. It seems like art is a way to get back into the human story, and we can go into a place and experience people's lives and maybe step into someone else's shoes or at least to be near them and see what they've gone through, and then add that to that conceptual thinking that we're going to have when we step away from it. And then what I found, oftentimes as questions like this come up where it gets back to that political realm. I'm not comfortable there. I'm more comfortable inside the stories and with the people's lives.
Left their glasses on your head.
Yeah? Is that okay?
It's a good look. You're okay.
It reflects this.
All right.
It's,
Is it going to start a fire?
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. It's a very old building. On that, and I'll just take a heartbeat here. What do you think about your work being used someday for Iraqi soldiers and families to read what the two of you have written from the American's perspective, to give them a look at the American soul, the American presence, because they see the soldiers saying, everything is all right. We're all friends. I'm showing my hands. And inside your head is the thing that they never get to really understand or witness or have that long discussion. Like, hey, I'm going to sit in your house here, and we're going to discuss the politics that led me to your spot and what I took from it over the years with perspective involved. Do you think it'd be pretty cool to have your books translated into Arabic and sent to Iraq someday?
No, the recent one hasn't. I imagine yours has. Or
No, it hasn't. But I had this conversation with Larry Heineman, who wrote Paco's Story, won the National Book Award back in 1980 something, and he basically goes to Vietnam as often as he can. And I said, I just can't imagine going to a Baghdad literary festival in 2035 and having a discussion. But that's what he's doing. I mean, he goes to Vietnam to go to and he talks to Vietnamese soldiers, and they come to some shared understanding of the war, of which, of course, the American involvement was like a sliver in the middle between French and Chinese and everything.
Yeah,
else.
we call it the war in Vietnam. They call it the American War.
Right, because the whole thing was decades. And I said, I can't imagine ever doing this. And he said, don't worry, I couldn't imagine it in 1975. So I guess, who knows what's going to happen in
It's going to happen.
30 years.
Because I've been trying to make a call for just that thing.
It would,
And I'm going to try to make it happen. I'll be a part of it. So
Okay.
I'm hoping you both will do this.
I'm in.
well, let's go.
I imagine it'll start probably like Suleimania, and then maybe Basra, maybe biennially, every 2 years or so, going there, but then also bringing them here. Larry Heineman and I sat down and we talked about a similar thing in Boston, and I'm trying to follow Bruce Weigel and Yusuf Komunyakaa and Carolyn Forche and some of that, through the Joiner Center. That's a very useful. Creating a bridge to writers there, I think, is really important. And you can do that too. You don't have to wait for us to do that. You don't even have to go there. You can Skype people, you can meet people through the internet, you can meet writers and talk to them. If you don't mind, I'll give you one quick quote. I sat in Baghdad in 2011, and Sadek Mohammed told me he was talking about Eliot, T.S. Eliot, and this is a direct quote, so you don't have to learn Arabic. This is what he said. He said, he's a very big guy, he said, so with Eliot, well, where is the objective correlative, I ask you? So, do you know what the objective correlative is?
We say it in Traverse City all the time. We have another question here.
Would you comment on what you're going to do next, what the next project is, but particularly would you be thinking of looking at other aspects of American life through the lens of the war or independent of war, other social movements?
Yes to both. So I have another book done. It actually starts, and my agent, knock on wood, cross your fingers, all those kind of things, is finding a good home for it as we speak. And it's nonfiction, and it's about Afghanistan, but it actually starts, like I had mentioned, the Schwartz family before. It starts there, the first 3 chapters, what led up to Matt's death, and then me asking, including the funeral and things here in Traverse City. And then it asks the question of who killed him. And that's actually a more difficult question than it might seem like. And so I spend the rest of the book, trying to answer that. But to get to I guess to the rest of your question, yes, I would love to. I would love to write about other things. I've got a novel planned after this book, and then I've got something else planned after that. And yet it all seems to be about the war. Even when it's not about the war, it's about the war. Right, like, Hemingway again, Old Man in the Sea, is about the war, right? So It's just, I don't know. I think it's always going to inform, if nothing else.
He doesn't know this, but we're all going to grow beards, and we're going to go on the road with a band. So
Okay.
you didn't.
No.
Did we talk about that before?
Well, I mean, I've got a head start on it.
I know. That's why it's going to take some time. I wrote many poems before I went to Iraq and Bosnia, and I ended up writing poems about Bosnia and then Iraq, and then the memoir. But if I look back at the poems that I wrote before, they're on a wide variety of subjects. And I hope that if I'm fortunate to have a large canvas of a life, that maybe there'll be other subjects to come. There's a book I'm working on now called The Dead Peasant's Handbook. Do you guys know what dead peasants are, that nickname? That's a nickname for insurance company people who come in, corporations hire adjusters to come in and look at the audience, yeah, right? Look at this guy and say he's a worker, a little overweight, getting a little older, he has a chance of dying and da-da-da-da-da, or whatever, and then taking a secret policy out that the corporation knows about, but not the individual. They may die and not even have an insurance policy of their own, but the company's protected. That's a dead peasant policy. So it's called the Dead Peasant's Handbook. And again, the landscape, the sort of landscape of war may look like parts of Detroit or Fresno, or so the landscape may look like war, but the subject is love and loss and the people inside it.
One of you mentioned that you've got children, or at least two of you did.
Yeah.
Mr. Turner.
I have 2 cats, man.
Okay.
That's all I can handle.
So my question is not going to apply to you, unfortunately, but I'm curious how and if you communicate with your children some of these obviously very deep, very involved issues personally as you go through life, or if you try to rely on your work exclusively to try to communicate some of these things to your kids.
Yeah, I've got a number of contradictory answers to that, which is that on one level, I wrote this book for my children. And because I didn't have an agent, I didn't understand the publishing process. I thought, if nothing else, I'm going to print out one copy and put it on the shelf, and it's going to explain why Dad was the way he was when they were young. At the same time, now I've got 4 boys, 16, 11, 8, 5. I haven't let my 16-year-old read it yet. So I'm starting to learn that, like, I wrote it for my sons, but like some theoretical 30-year-old version of them when they're fathers or something. Like, that's when they're allowed to read the book. On the other hand, so I wrote this book and I wrote it for them, but I don't talk to them about any of this, and I'm not sure how I would. And I've learned that this whole thing about World War I veterans probably didn't talk to their children, and World War II veterans didn't talk to their children, and Vietnam veterans didn't talk to theirs. And guess what? I'm about to not talk to my children either. And I'll talk to all of you about it, and I'll write a book about it, but there's something different about sitting down with your own children. Why? And it's, I don't know if it's a vulnerability, if it's I'm still the caretaker. I'm still, it's not that I think I'm immortal and invincible, it's that they do, and like, how do you start this conversation with your children? And so I know that my grandfather and uncles and such who were in Vietnam would never have been able to write this book. It's just not how times were. Like, you're allowed to do things in 2014 that you're not before. But I'm still not talking to my own kids. We'll have to see how that goes, I guess, as they get older.
And I've got a 10 and a 5-year-old daughter who are magical beings. They're just fantastical. I think my book, once again, is also, it explains the death of the magic. It talks about the end of wonder. And I have to protect them from that truth. I have to allow them to exist in that world where not that nobody dies, but in the world where there's still less consequence. They can still have that kind of amazing freedom that children have when they feel they're protected and loved, and that I'm, like he said, I'm still immortal to them. And my whole book talks about how that all leads to an end. And they don't need that yet. I don't need that yet. And I like Brian, I don't know when, but at some point, since they're both smarter than I am, you know, they'll figure it out. You know, they'll get around me.
When did you read your dad's books?
I'm still reading them.
Okay.
You know, but really, probably right around after college, you know, I think I'd read maybe one of his books before college because I was busy digging holes and building forts and things.
Right.
He was up writing. So, you know, we had these different worlds, separate ways, worlds apart. And I don't know, you know, a lot of it ends up, you know, the children in his books, if you watch them from the 70s all the way through his last book, you're like, I see myself growing up. And, you know, I see him examining all the things I thought he wasn't watching. There's always like a kid building a stone wall in the back. And I was like, nobody saw me doing that. My dad was in his writing room watching me. Like, so that's how a kid builds a stone wall. And I'm glad, because it's kind of a weird fictional record of someone observing me. You know, it's like the stuff your parents have when they leave. Like, they're the only ones that ever saw my first steps. Things like that, you know, I think are kind of amazing, and that it's put into language. So, you know, maybe it was good that I didn't read it in its time, and that I get to see myself again, you know, in my way. And also, I see him. You know, the narrator is always my father. The strong woman is always my mother. And he's always failing. He's always going to fail, you know, and it was my father's fear, you know, so I think it's interesting. But great question.
You know,
We have time for
if you guys don't
one
mind, the one thing I was just going to say, I don't have children, but my book writing the book helped open up the conversation with the men that are living in my family that served in Vietnam and World War II through my dad. But my dad, for example, we started sending emails back to him and forth, and he started sending them to his brothers, and then my cousin, who was in Iraq at the same time I was, and it started this conversation and stories that I always heard the periphery of war. I never heard his war, you know, his time, until those stories opened those up too.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
First of all, thank you for your service. Thought I'd say that as a joke. And thank you for writing about Matthew Schwartz. He's not everyone here knows that he is from Traverse City and he died in service to our country. Let's say we've given up with writing to our politicians because they're about to prove Einstein's theory in Iraq by going back there to end up with a different outcome this time. So we ought to be writing to the children, but when I think of that, I think, well, then you better write a video game and not Mortal Kombat 19, but or not an instruction manual for a drone pilot. Or you might try a graphic novel. In other words, we're writing to reach, who are we writing to reach? Who is going to be reached? If we can't tell our kids about the books we're writing, and we can't affect the children, the young people who will go into the service, and the politicians are unreachable, then where is the target? Who are we trying to hit? Or is it maybe just ourselves?
Wow, what a last question.
Yeah.
That's
this,
a good nightcap.
This night's going to be extended by an hour. I hope you're all hydrated. We need water in here. Geez. Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to, I don't know, I said that I don't trust politics and I try to stay out of it, but I would observe this from the outside. Every politician of every party is fundamentally a coward when it comes to this idea, is that they want to be reelected and they're going to vote in ways, and they're going to do things in ways that get them reelected. And I think that we keep fighting because just, it's not that people are even for a war or against a war, it's just that we're not paying attention to a war. It's easy for it to happen and for nobody to really notice. And this is a very hard thing to ask, and I'm preaching to a choir of who would, if you drove through the snow to attend this book event tonight, you don't need to hear anything that I'm about to say, right? But if people started paying attention in general, and there was a mass movement of paying attention, so who were we writing for? If I go to colleges, I mean, all of us do book events all over, and you're just trying to break out of your little sphere, and you hope you talk to somebody new that isn't already paying attention, and then maybe if more and more people pay attention, eventually the politicians will just do wherever wherever the polls, say to go, I think. And so what we're really battling is apathy. It's just this. It's not that people are for or against it. It's just there's too many other things to do, and it's too easy to just kind of put it, over there.
It's great to have a book that starts a conversation. If we can do that, we're winning. And I mean, it's all we have, right? A communication. That's why we choose words generally. It's a way to articulate these ideas. And war happens due to the failure of communication, at least on the surface, right? We can no longer negotiate with you. We can't use words anymore. We're just going to have to blow you up. And that's how a war happens, right? It's a failure of politics. And a nation will go as far as its leaders will take them if they're not stopped. We thought once the war would be unpopular, they would stop it. And 9 years later, and now we're heading back in, you kind of wonder, okay, where exactly did the conversation stop? Is it our fault?
Can I jump in on that?
Yes.
No one up here, if you don't mind. How many of you know how to say hello in Arabic? How many of you know how to say goodbye? How many of you know a name, not a name like Malik or something, maybe a name of an Arabic intellectual specifically in Iraq? Do you know any books written from Iraq? Do you know any names other than Baghdad, Kirkuk, Ramadi, Mosul, Tikrit, and Basra? Do you know how many people have died? Do you know, has anyone ever asked what the suicide rate is in Iraq or Afghanistan for the Iraqis and the Afghan people? At some point I start to wonder, I don't have any answers. I ask questions, and one of my questions is, are we so wealthy a nation? I said a few curse words up there before, but are we so wealthy a nation that we can wage war and not even pay attention to it? And how obscenely wealthy that must be. And I'm sorry to indict, not a good idea, right, to indict the audience.
Right.
But I share with you the questions that I have for myself. I know how to say hello and goodbye, but I don't know the words in between. And how long have we been, shukran, sadiq.
Inshallah.
Yeah, there's many, we can begin, a few words even. But when are we going to begin that conversation? We talk about you'll see on the news even about bombs and who are you going to kill and are we using drones, and it's all about the lethality and sort of the mechanisms of war. But what about other parts? Like when are we going to, should we send teachers over to talk? Would you guys like some coats for winter? It gets pretty cold in Michigan. I know in the north, I didn't know it snowed in the northern parts of Iraq. Maybe you guys, we could get a coat drive and send a pallet of coats to some of the Kurds that were up on those mountaintops. Even if it's just a gesture. We could afford that, couldn't we?
Going back to how do we reach the people who aren't discussing it, by way of especially the youth who don't seem to be reading as much, and as tied in as they are to everything by way of social media, et cetera, they're not having deep discussion, it seems. They're using less and less language, shorter and shorter sandwich, more and more abbreviation. Well, you can talk to a kid any day. You say, hey, put the phone down for a second. It's not their fault they're not paying attention if someone's not saying, hey, look at that every once in a while. I think it's a humanity issue. We're all part of that, no matter what. The accident of our birth has placed us in a position of authority. So that's, I don't know. You've all been wonderful. We love you. This is one of the most stalwart audiences that anyone could ever boast and be grateful for. On behalf of the National Writers Series, are you going to say something?
I'm just going to say.
He's going to say exactly those things.
You should have come up with the curtain behind it.
You're the most independent men I know. It's been a pleasure to listen to you. I told you it'd be a bit of a variety show, and I was right. All three will be in the lobby to talk more, take more questions, and sign their books. Please come by and say hello, and we'll see you in the new season after the new year. Thank you.
Thank you.